He had to make a decision. At 17 years old, this decision would have life-altering effects, and it was of definite importance. But the young man was all too familiar with tough choices. Toughness was symbiotic to his character. Anthony Edwards had to make a decision, and he knew he had to reclassify to the class of 2019 from 2020. It had loomed over him, but ultimately, it came down to what's best for his family. I just felt like, for me and my family, I was ready to get out of school. To Anthony Edwards, family was everything. Life is a trial, and sometimes the cruelest of verdicts can be thrust upon the unprepared, and nothing in this world is more devastating than watching the people you love the most lose their light. For Edwards, he experienced this pain 1,000-fold. From his youth, his mother and his grandmother had taken care of him. They put food on his plate and clothes on his back. They had raised the boy into a young man. As a child, he got in trouble for writing future NBA player on his bedroom wall. His grandmother scolded him for it, but she did not remove the writing. His family was a stable foundation and a humble upbringing. In 2015, his mother would tragically pass away from cancer. What's even more saddening is that his grandmother would subsequently pass away from cancer in the same year, leaving a 14-year-old boy broken, stranded in a tough situation without his maternal figures. His older brother and sister would assume guardianship over him, raising him the best they could. Edwards had suffered a lifetime of grief at such a young age. Pain of such potency can turn any soul to the darkest corners of this world for comfort, or it can iron harden someone's resolve. And Edwards was the latter. He'd become a man quickly from all his trauma. All throughout high school, he wore the number 5 to represent them, as both women had passed on the 5th of the month. Ant was known around the city for being a football star, but his true calling was basketball. And he realized sooner than later that the game was his way to salvation. He'd work his ass off in honor of his mother and grandmother, and with the hunger to lift his family out of the struggle. For Anthony Edwards, he only desired to help his family, and he planned to do all of this with a smile on his face. His destiny was established the moment he'd written future NBA player on his bedroom wall. The summer was where he'd make his name, drawing eyes to his AAU appearances on the Under Armour circuit. His guardian angels overlooking him meant the arduous path was well illuminated. Edwards surged his national ranking from the middle of the pack to the front of the line after joining the class of 2019. He finished his expedited senior year as the number 1 shooting guard in the country, courting offers from Southern powerhouses and a blue blood. There was no wrong choice. Edwards, ever the family man, chose to stay close to home, committing to the University of Georgia. In his singular year as a Bulldog, he averaged 19 points per game on 52% true shooting and was the 3rd leading scorer in the SEC. His off-the-charts athleticism plus his length made him the prototypical 2-guard. Despite being on the shorter end at his position, Edwards appeared bigger on the court because of his bulky frame and his heightened wingspan. 1 year at Georgia transformed the Oakland City native into an NBA caliber player. As the 2020 NBA draft approached, Edwards locked himself in a gym and prepped diligently with longtime trainer and close friend Justin Holland. And when the time came to hear his name get announced by the commissioner, Ant did not have to wait. The announcement of the Minnesota Timberwolves selecting him first overall meant the man had accomplished his dream. All of his dedication and hard work had accumulated to this very moment. The first overall pick with the chance to pursue the rarest of dreams and to change the course of his lineage. No more moving from place to place for him. He'd found a permanent home in Minnesota. Edwards wasted no time asserting himself in the league. With the fire brimming in his soul, the youngster displayed his passion feverishly on the court. He'd have issues with efficiency in the beginning of his career, shooting below 45% from the field in his first 2 seasons. His poor percentage came down to his ill-advised shot selection. He'd settle for deep mid-range shots, which is a habit he still has to overcome. Such is the curse with high-level shot creators. early on in their careers. The mid-ranger is an art that only rewards the most devoted of its students, so to achieve mastery, all but forces one to experience trial by fire. That's to say, he needs to get those hours in the gym before he can routinely make those contested pull-ups. But in 2024, Ant has refined his game and he scaled back on his three-point heaves. He's also began to fully capitalize on his defensive potential. Being a point of attack defender for the best defense in the league, he's improved on all fronts. 26 a night with 5 and 5 and 46% from the field. Edwards came second in win shares amongst shooting guards, and he has had a value over replacement player VORP score of 3.7, which also placed him second in that position behind Donovan Mitchell. The 22-year-old had something to prove last season. With his team being gentlemen swept the year prior, Edwards had to defend his troops while they were taunted as failures. In 2023, it seemed as if Minnesota was trapped in basketball limbo, with their franchise man seemingly destined to repeat what had happened to the last Timberwolves superstar. But they say patience is a virtue for a reason, because in the 2024 season, the Minnesota Timberwolves fired on all cylinders, boasting a lineup of switchable on-ball defenders such as all-defensive player Jaden McDaniels, and a stacked cast of big men who forebodingly protected the paint like the current defensive player of the year Rudy Gobert, and they also had scorers off the bench like the reigning sixth man of the year Naz Reid. Franchise cornerstone Karl Anthony Towns, who himself is a multi-time All-Star and a former All-NBA player, is commendable for adapting his role to suit the team and taking a step back. Then you add the rock star Ant-Man, and you have yourself a top 3 seed in the cutthroat Western Conference. Minnesota had formed the most balanced roster in the entire association, and heading into the playoffs, the biggest concern was about the head of the snake. The team was not deficient in any particular department, it really just came down to star power. Was Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns enough to contend for an NBA championship? Well, the question mark regarding Edwards vanished quickly as he ignited in their first round matchup. He faced the Phoenix Suns with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, two of the best scorers of this era, and Ant surpassed both legends for the series. He simply overwhelmed Phoenix with his sheer firepower, averaging 31 points per game in an effortless sweep. The Timberwolves' second round matchup versus the reigning champs became the show stealer of the 2024 playoffs. The second-seeded Denver Nuggets faced the third-seeded Minnesota Timberwolves. In a postseason matchup which will be remembered for years to come, both heavyweights landed powerful blows to their opponents as the pendulum unceasingly swung in favor of both sides. The culmination of this clash would be a Game 7 in Denver. After tying the series 3-2 in Minnesota, the Timberwolves had to win one more to extend their playoff life, but they'd have to face the somber nightmare Nikola Jokic in the Mile High City. Edwards and his Wolves were dealt a difficult hand, but in a Game 7 of epic proportions, Minnesota went all in. Edwards shot poorly, but his activity and his hounding defense secured the victory for his club. The Timberwolves had bested last year's champions, and now they were in a real position to reach the NBA Finals. All that stood before them was the Dallas Mavericks. Despite conquering the best team in the West, styles make fights, and the Timberwolves were undermatched versus Dallas. The Mavericks dealt with them swiftly, and Ant's flame was extinguished with haste, and so ended the Minnesota Timberwolves playoff run. During that postseason, Edwards had the 9th highest offensive Raptor as a 22-year-old. Offensive Raptor is one of those all-encompassing advanced stats that pretty much show how effective a player was on that end of the court. So, surrounded by stars, he did not dim whatsoever. The Timberwolves have no reason to be disappointed. With Edwards still blooming and Towns far from his prime, this team's projection is sky high. Anthony Edwards has become a household name because of the man's exciting plays and his boisterous personality. His Adidas campaign has placed him as the flagship athlete for the brand moving forward, and he captured the world at the Olympics with his energetic performances for Team USA bringing home the gold. Ant-Man is here to stay, and he's gonna hog all the spotlight if he wins anymore. Thanks for watching.